So, thank you for being here with me, whoever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, and all of them things there. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for being here today with us here on Passion Radio. And as I always take from my mentor, I try not to take your listening ears for granted, all right? I try not to abuse them, but you know how it goes. You know how it goes. I'm a person who's got a lot to say. I can't help it. It's just who I am. And last time I was on the show, I was talking about identity. Identity is really important to me. It really means a lot. And I've come to understand a lot about identity and the different... Gosh, there are so many shows that I have got planned for you, talking about ley lines and how ley lines cross with identity. It's deep, man. All of this stuff is like bubbling to the fore, and I don't have enough. There's not enough weeks in the month, in the year. And then obviously I take my breaks, don't it? Well, I hope that you are well. I hope that your family is well. I hope that everybody you care about is well. And if you have possessions, then I hope that you're taking care of them and you're valuing them. I hope that your year is going well. I hope that your health is good. And I hope that your mental and emotional and spiritual and physical and social levels are high, or at least balanced. Yeah, in a nice, positive way. There you go. All right. So today I wanted to talk to you about fight and flight. Have you heard about those? They like trauma responses. Fight and flight. So there's fight, flight, fright, and the next one, flee. But different people have different words that they use. So one that I came across recently was fight, flight, freeze, and appease. Now that's a new one. Appease. Taught me a bit about myself. It really did. So in this show, just for any of you who don't know what DJ LP talks about, I normally talk about sociology. I talk about spirituality. I talk about the changes that are taking place in the world today. And I talk about how we can strengthen ourselves from within, because times are changing and we really do have to have our wits about us at this time and moving forward. There's a lot of astrological align. There's a word that I'm looking for. Can't have it. Can't find it. But there's a lot of astrological alignments that are taking place that actually affect us, not only on a spiritual level, but on an energetic, emotional level as well. You know, sometimes even little things like the position of the moon can really affect your mood, your behaviors, you know, of course, because we are made up of a lot of water, and so are the seas. Our bodies are nature. We are nature at our core. And it's about time that we start to recognize that and treat our bodies as such, with an awareness of who we are, where we're coming from, and how those different planetary alignments and star constellations and, astrological things are affecting your life. You know, I had a conversation with somebody recently and I said, I feel like I'm losing my words. I feel like I am just deteriorating, like in my mind, in my vocabulary. And she told me about brain fog. And I was like, yeah, I've always heard about brain fog, but I never actually thought that maybe it could, I could have it. But why not? I'm here on Earth having a human experience. So let's talk more about human experiences, and the ways in which we react to them, respond to them, are affected by them, and what we can do for ourselves in order to counteract them, balance them, and indeed use them to our ability. Because most of our actions, most of our abilities are super. We just don't know it, and the environment that we are in can lead us to believe that we just ain't all that, when really we're all that plus a bag of chips. Don't let anybody tell you any different, all right? You are all that. Now, what I must say is that I am a melanated woman. I am a melanated woman, which means that I am descending from the African, Caribbean, Black, British background, cultures. Those are not my authentic culture, my authentic identity, but I don't know what that is, because it was kind of stripped away from me long before I was born, long before my great-great-greats were even born, okay? So we kind of find ourselves in a little bit of a limbo, but we do what we can with the tools that we have and the resources that are available to us. So as I was saying, I'm going to be talking a lot today. I do have music just to kind of, slip in between. But yeah, I'm following on from the conversation that we had about being void of identity. Now, if anybody would like to see that conversation or listen to it, you can do so. It's on YouTube, and the channel is Dipism, DIPISM.UK, maybe.uk, Dipism.uk. Dipism stands for Death in Practice, DIP, and ism is a way of life. Now, when you think about an ism, a way of life, you might want to ask yourself, is your personal ism a result of your own personal design? Or are you sitting in somebody else's ism, serving that ism, creating that ism, forwarding that ism? And do you have an ism of your own that perhaps you would actually benefit more from? And also, more importantly, that humanity would benefit more from. If you know deep in your heart that you have your own personal ism, which is your beat that you walk to, which is your personal heartbeat, which keeps you going, then I think it's about time that we start looking at our own personal isms and bringing them to the fore. Okay? There's enough room for everybody, even though we're led to believe that things have to be a certain way. They don't. We're living in a time of change, and this is a very powerful time energetically, socially, and spiritually. So please, if there's something that you know deep in your heart that you have that needs to come out, don't let it go to the grave with you, okay? Get it out there, share it with the world, because you are too beautiful, you are too valuable, you are too wonderful for us to not share in your greatness. Okay, all right. So, as I've said, I wanted to talk to you today about trauma responses, those of fight, flight, freeze, and appease. As a melanated woman, I speak primarily, I guess, to my sisters on this show today. But this information that I'm going to share is vital for all people to hear and to digest. Okay? Also, primarily, as a melanated woman, I speak to my melanated brothers and sisters. That doesn't mean that I don't care about anybody else, but I recognize that when we're good, everybody else is good. Okay? Whereas sometimes if you look at people from other backgrounds, if they're good, other people are suffering. I don't believe that's the case when it comes to melanated people. I believe that if we're good, then everybody else will be good. on that note, I've got a comment here from LJ. DJ LP just jumped on the station. Not sure if it's a recording. However, good to have you back on. Thank you very much. It's not a recording. I'm here in the flesh, live and direct. But it's so interesting. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm about to go off into another one. So I was recently speaking to the great teacher who is Edison. And it was a Zoom conversation, and he was explaining to me how, you know, we make our images, we form the images. Our eyes don't actually see. We kind of go on memory, you know. So he was saying, I'm looking at you from the screen, and I perceive that your back wall is about 5 or so feet away from you, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at you on a screen, so really and truly, there is no distance. There's just you. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And he was like, but further than that, you don't exist. You're in my mind. And I suppose it's interesting. I'm saying that because I'm here and I'm talking about this subject today, and you are here. You do have the option of clicking off, but I really hope you don't. I really hope that regardless of your colour, your age, your background, whatever you perceive your identity or your culture to be, that you actually get something from this conversation today. Just as I hope that you got something from the conversation when I was asking, are you void of identity? I will be touching on that today, but today, really and truly, we're looking at the whole fight, flight, and freeze and appease. Those are trauma responses. Now, it recently came through the work that myself and my spiritual partners have been doing that the base of the Caucasian person is to control. So at their base, they need to be in control. Whereas the base of the melanated person is to seek safety and survive. Okay? So the base of the melanated person is to seek safety and survive, which means that the decisions that we make are primarily based on how safe am I going to be? How secure is this foundation? Are my children going to be safe? Is my partner going to be safe? Is my family going to be safe? What I'm going to do now, is this going to be a safe thing? Is it going to be precarious? Am I on dodgy ground? The base of the melanated person is to seek safety and survive. And so we often rely on the trauma responses of fight, flight, freeze, and appease when we are trying to survive. In the West, the melanated woman is portrayed as aggressive. Okay? No matter how meek and mild we know her to be, she will always be perceived as aggressive. But let's have a look at that and ask ourselves why. Why is it that the melanated woman is often seen as an aggressive person? Well, based on the ingrained culture of the West, as shown traditionally through period dramas, we're shown how Western women are supposed to behave, and there is a code that is silently adhered to even today in this modern world. So women on the television are often portrayed as kind of meek, mild, genteel, kind of, you know, maybe a bit assertive sometimes, but never really aggressive, you know, or downright rude or miserable and argumentative, which is what labels are often put on the melanated woman. When a melanated woman comes up within this Western culture that is not authentic or original to us, our journey, our plight is one of survival. Okay? So many of us have witnessed or experienced emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, household mental illness, substance abuse, intimate partner violence, parental divorce or separation, unexpected death within the household, and parental or spousal incarceration. We have experienced those statistically higher than most people from other backgrounds. So in my last show, I explained that we are at large chameleons. We have a lot that's going on in the background, but we adapt. We take on other people's identities because we don't have an identity of our own. And if without all of that, I'm going to call it baggage, but life experiences, if without all of those life experiences, if we didn't have them, I wonder whether we would have more of an identity. Oftentimes, our life experiences form our identity. But those life experiences that I have just outlined to you are not positive. They're not exactly loving and comforting and nurturing life experiences. We're talking about abuses and violences and separations and incarcerations and, mental situations that will always alter how we're doing, how we're responding, how we're thinking, and how we're feeling. We exist within a world that is created off our backs, not for our backs. And so we take the strain, and it hasn't stopped being back-breaking work. We are subject to a detrimental void that has been forged through relentless, disparaging traumatization that has led the melanated population to an almost constant malignant state that produces deterioration and disproportionately earlier deaths than our counterparts, as imposed by repetitive, heinous traumas. Now, you may be thinking, this is a bit deep, LP. It is deep. It is. I'm not even going to lie. But we have to be having these conversations because we know that we're living in a time of change. My intention is to give you any little information that I have because it may help you a little bit further down the line. Again, doesn't matter what colour you are. It doesn't matter your background or where you're coming from. The information that I'm giving you is primarily for people that look like me, but will benefit everybody. Okay? So most people on Earth today have experienced levels of trauma. But when you are traumatized and in survival mode, you don't or you can't respond in the same way as your counterpart from a different background or a different colour or a different culture. So I'm just going to say Sally, yeah? I could say Laura. But we're all different, aren't we? When you're traumatised and in survival mode as a melanated woman, you cannot respond in the same way to Sally because you are fighting spiritually in a way that Sally could never conceive. She's never had to. And this is an unconscious fight that we ourselves are not entirely consciously aware of. But it rises up because it is within the ancestral DNA. There is an understanding within us that we will not be treated fairly. There is an understanding, or even maybe an overstanding, which is even more painful, that you're never going to be on the same footing as your counterparts who have the authority to make changes to your existence. So we, as melanated women, have to fight for anything and everything that we want. There is a hardship to our lives. So we revert to automatic responses that take us back to our programming, our experiences, and our learned beliefs and patterns. So when we are perceived as shouting or aggressive, most times we are merely trying to express ourselves from a perspective of continuously being misunderstood. Let's just think about that, okay? If you inherently know that no matter what you say or how it is said, you're going to be misunderstood, your words are going to be twisted, you're going to get frustrated. Your voice is going to be raised because you really need people to understand what you're saying one time without you having to explain again and again and again. Sometimes it can feel like we're speaking Swahili to a person that we're speaking English to. They don't understand what we're saying, and we get where they're coming from, but we don't know how we can make them understand what we're saying. Sometimes people don't want to hear what we're saying, and so they will have their own preconceived ideas, which then lead to further frustration, annoyance, agitation. When you are living, breathing, and building from a platform of traumatization, you can never feel safe. So you're constantly flitting between the fight response, the flight response, which is to turn and run away, just leave it, the freeze response when you're stunned and just allow people to do whatever and you just say nothing, and then there is appease. Now, the appease is the interesting one for me. The appease response is where you become compliant. Yes, master. Yes, okay, yeah, I'll just do it. Yeah, all right, fine. Yeah, okay, cool, you're right. Okay, yeah, okay. And this is often happening on an unconscious level. I use appease often because it's just easier to just say, yeah, okay, do what you're doing. I'll work around you. But it causes more stress. So when we start to recognize the fact that we are all traumatized, it is important to realize the trauma cycles that we keep on repeating. We are on a wheel. We're still working, we're still living, we're turning, we're having relationships, we're having conversations, but it's a wheel of trauma that we are existing within. And that is a component that Sally doesn't necessarily have. So people are wary of the melanated woman. They're aware that she could snap at any moment. It's unlikely, but sometimes on a subconscious level, the stereotype and the reality is there. If then it does happen, there is a disproportionate judgment towards the black woman. Let me just see if I can break that down in another way, all right? We're carrying so much. We really are. We're carrying, we're juggling. We're literally juggling. We're doing what we can with the tools and the resources that we've got, right? And I think that subconsciously people know that we're carrying a lot. Originally, we were like the mothers, yeah? We're like often seen as the mammy who just gives everybody warmth and comfort and support and holds everything together. But surely there comes a time when we must crash, don't it? Yeah? There has to come a time when we're like, flipping heck, I can't take anymore. And we snap. But when we do snap, there is nothing in place to comfort and support us. We instead are subjected to disproportionate judgment, which is often 10 times worse than the actual snap itself. But it the snap then becomes exasperated. It becomes, I was going to say elucidated, like I know what it means. It becomes exaggerated, you know, and it's blown out of proportion. And it results in a judgment that is rooted in shame. And I think that's why Diane Abbott got mullered the other day. I think she got mullered because she crossed the etiquette lines. And that's why she wasn't supported by her counterparts. So it might seem like I've jumped now. I haven't. I'm going to come to it. All right? Etiquette lines are unspoken because they are ingrained within the white DNA. Okay? Because that is the dominant culture in this country. Okay? So the lines, there are unspoken rules, there are unspoken dictates that people grow with. And even if you were born in the UK or, you know, a predominantly Caucasian country, you still grow up to sort of know these etiquette lines that you can cross and that you can't cross. But because they're ingrained in a white person in a different way to how they're ingrained in a black person who is coming from a state of needing to survive, we are going to react differently. So when we go into school, when we are in society, Sally grows up quite relaxed. She's not as traumatized to the extent of the melanated woman. She's learning the unspoken rules. She's seeing them. She's absorbing them into her skin, through her eyes, through her ears, through her senses. Okay? Whereas the melanated woman is watching her parents fight, flee, freeze, appease. So she is being cultivated in a dialogue that involves trauma reactions. She will use the appropriate trauma response to survive. In the UK, it's more institutionalized. However, we still sense danger. But when Sally is learning the etiquette through her sensory perception and her parental upbringing in a country that actually works for her, is designed for her highest good, she responds differently. We as melanated people are learning the appropriate trauma response through our perceptions, and when we don't, sooner or later, we will be treated differently for even the same behaviour as that may have been displayed by Sally or John. When trauma first happens, there is a shock element, a stunned surprise that feeds into the freeze response. It's that, hold on a second, but I've been coming here for years. But wait, that's never happened before. That's confusion. That's confusion. And if you don't process your confusion, then that is what's going to take you to trauma. Because that confusion has to be unraveled. It's like a jumbled knot of string that needs to be unpacked. All right? So have you ever been in a situation where something's happened and you're just stunned? You're like, but weird. But what is this? Hold on. That's never happened. Did you say that? Did you really say? No, you can't have meant that. Are you serious? It's confusion. When we find ourselves in a situation that is different to the norm, it's confusing. We are stunned into confusion and we respond to that which becomes a traumatic experience. And if we don't unpick it, then that trauma settles into our bodies and causes sickness. So apparently, from the moment of an incident, you have around 72 hours to unravel it. After 72 hours, the shock and confusion settles into trauma. Apparently, they started to debrief soldiers within that 72 hours, and they found that the soldiers didn't flip out as badly or at all after 72 hours was just too late. They'd become traumatized. But within that 72 hours, if they had been caught within that 72 hours after having or experiencing a traumatic incident, then their confusion and their stundation, yes, I've just made that word up. I like that. Stundation. Stundation is somewhat abated. Okay, and they're less likely to go AWOL and flip out. Now, of course, we as parents, or indeed our parents, were not taught to treat our children's trauma situations. Half the time, I don't even think we've realized that our children have experienced a traumatic situation. Sometimes if a situation has happened in school, we might not actually hear about it, you know. But our parents and ourselves, we're not always aware that we're in a survival mode and that our children are in survival mode. If you have an awareness of your trauma responses or your children's trauma responses, and you can process those responses within 72 hours, then that is you treating yourself before that trauma settles into your body or your child's body. So it may be a good idea to just go over the day's events, you know, or sit down with our children and say, so what happened at school? And then what happened? And how did you feel about that? And what did you think? And what do you think now? And what are you going to do next? And how do you think the other person felt? Do you think that was fair? Do you think they were treated fairly? And what did your teachers say? And how did you feel about the way your teachers responded? What we must believe is that every person, or what we must remember rather, is that every person we have an interaction with has learned behaviors and cultures, identities and beliefs that have been programmed into them also. So oftentimes when we are dealing with other people, there is so much more interaction taking place than we are actually aware of. You know, if little Johnny comes and does something to your child, you don't know what little Johnny's being told at home about your child or people that look like your child, or about people in general and how to treat people. You don't know how Johnny himself is being treated and what he is being exposed to. And so it's like you have to manage your child that has been affected by Johnny's parents, Johnny's grandparents and great-grandparents. It's a lot. This is deep. And sometimes you may need to go over it again and again to see where perhaps you froze, or you fought, or you flighted, you ran off, you backed down, or where you appeased in order to loosen the knots in this ball of string that is now yours to unravel. So that's one way to treat trauma, or before it becomes trauma, you know, is to talk about it, is to sit down and actually think about what it was that you went through, okay? And yes, you may need to go over it again and again, but the more times you go over it, the better it is for you. This is why it's so sad when therapists have such long waiting lists. Such long waiting lists. When somebody experiences a bereavement, they're often told, oh, well, if it happened within the past 3 months, or if it's happened within the last 6 months, we're not going to give you an appointment because you need to let it settle in first. But sometimes that 3 months or that 6 months is the difference itself between life and death because of everything else that person is carrying. Oftentimes, a bereavement is the last straw. And where somebody was able to be walking forwards, that might be the one thing that makes them start walking backwards. Okay? Now, I, myself, am a clinical hypnotherapist. And the other day I was speaking to somebody who also is a hypnotherapist, a nice brother from Leeds. And we had a really nice conversation within which I had to say to him that I am not conventional. I'm not a conventional hypnotherapist because my methods are different. My methods are geared towards people in a way that overstands people and seeks to have people overstand themselves. The likes of Freud and Carl Jung, whilst they have their place, they were not thinking about the melanated man, melanated woman, or melanated child. Now, when it comes to trauma and confusion and shock, there are different practices that use similar methods to hypnotherapy, like CBT and EMDR, the Sedona method, and Psych-K, parts therapy too. And it would be really good if you just go on Google and look those up for yourself and find your own overstanding if you decide that you would like to deal with the trauma that may be lurking within your body. CBT, EMDR, the Sedona method, Psych-K, parts work. Okay? Through these methods, we can unlock the hidden blockages within ourselves that have been built up over the years and the centuries due to repetitive trauma. Traumas that have been inherited through the psychological DNA and through programs that have been inherited and imposed through the collective consciousness. Now, there's not so much research that's been done on that when it comes to trauma, but it is there, okay? It is there. And the reason why we know that it's there is because oftentimes those methods that actually traumatize us are created through the research of how trauma affects the body. Why do you think media is used as a tool to sway, to trick, to convince, to misinform, and to deceive the collective? Why? Because it's one of the most powerful tools for maintaining repetitive trauma. Okay? So when you look at the music nowadays, the rap music, my gosh, in my day, Lil' Kim was terrible. You know, I was told, don't listen to that music. It's terrible music. Oh my gosh, the words. Now, now I'm cringing, you know, but others around us may be more inclined to listen to the beat of a song, which is very seductive, which is very alluring, which is very hypnotic. And those beats will put our minds into a state that makes it easier for us to take in those words and accept them as truth and reality. Those words are repeated again and again and again, and we don't always realize that we are being traumatized. It's the same if you're watching the news. It's trauma upon trauma upon trauma. You know, sometimes I remember when I used to watch television, they would say, and on to a lighter note, or and a happier story. But even if they're going to give you a happy story, it is surrounded by 25 minutes of misery beforehand, 25 misery minutes afterwards, and just general misery. It's interesting. This is a science. This is a creation. It's not of our making. Okay? I strongly believe, and I will always hold on to the thought that the heart of the melanated person is one of happiness, is one of love at our core. But we have these layers of programs. We have this trauma within our DNA that has been sent down through the generations and has collected like onions around our hearts, our minds, and our being. And for that reason, we are distorted. For that reason, we are altered. For that reason, we are going to have to seek ways to survive, which means that we do and will respond using traumatic responses. Okay? Trauma responses such as fight, flight, freeze, and appease. We can all recall so many examples of the melanated girl, woman, mother, grandmother surviving within cycles of trauma responses by fighting, perceiving an attack when someone else raises their voice or acts in an unreasonable manner that triggers the need for a feeling of safety. If you understand what fight, fright, flight, freeze and appeasement responses look like, then you yourself can begin to reprogram your mode of operation. And when you do so for yourself, you will find that it ripples out to all that know and love you. You are listening to DJ LP on Passion Radio. How are you doing? I trust you are well. Thank you for joining me for the second hour of this show. It's not so much a music show, it's more of a talk the tings kind of show, but we did conclude the last hour with Ms. Jackson, Camp Kuchikayai, Latoya Jackson Milovar. The amount of trauma that must be resting in her soul. Oh my gosh, we send Latoya love. And that there was Playing Your Game, Baby, by Barry White, the one that some people did call the Walrus. He was such a lovely man. Yeah, man. Playing Your Game, Baby. So back to the conversation. First of all, what I want to say is that you really do need to download the Passion Radio app, you know. I'm talking to you as a friend, you know, just you and me here. Nobody else is listening. It's just us. And my piece of advice to you is that you download the app, all right? Because there's just so much more quality. There's just so much more that we can do together if you download the app. For example, LJ has commented on the first hour, what we were talking about. LJ has said that the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. And that's power, because they control the minds of the masses. And that was said by Malcolm X back then, when Malcolm X was alive. What has changed? The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. They have the power to jangle your nerves, to increase your fear, to decrease your feeling of safety. It all comes through media. They shake you, they sway you, they guide you, they direct you, oftentimes without you even realizing it. Advertising is something that really got my attention when I realized that what they do is they're putting you into a hypnotic trance, at which point I was like, wow, yeah, I see that. My brothers and sisters are in a trance, so how can I use hypnotherapy to break this trance? Now, gosh, this takes me back to a conversation that I had with a friend of mine called Crystal, and she was like, but imagine, because we talk a lot, imagine, Laura, though, right, if you have a car crash, yeah, and you are put into a coma, then that is to give your body time to respond to the trauma that your body has experienced. You're placed into a coma. You're put to sleep so that you do not disturb the body's natural healing mechanisms. That's basically what has been done to the melanated people. We have been placed into a coma, and that is why people talk about being woke and waking up, because we are coming out of that coma and we are now in a stronger position to deal with the traumas that our bodies, our hearts and minds have sustained. Okay, LJ goes on to speak about racial battle fatigue, as per Rev. Philippe Schock, Matthewsis, a term often termed for our condition. Okay, so the Reverend Philippe Schock, Matthewsis, says that the term for our condition is called racial battle fatigue. I've not heard of that before, but I can identify with that because I too am tired. And I don't even think that I fight as hard as my brothers and sisters on the battle lines. I really don't. But racial battle fatigue is a real thing because you wake up and it's as if you have to put on your armor. So many of us have to put on a face that is going to be accepted by those that we work with. Otherwise, you know, it's just not worth it. And I think that's where appeasement comes into. Let me just appease you. Let me just wear these clothes that are in alignment with your clothes so that you don't then turn around and say, oh, that's a bit colourful, isn't it? Or let me wear my hair in a way that is more allowable in your sight, so that I don't come back with, oh, can I touch your hair? Oh, it's so big. Oh, it's so messy. Oh, it's quite unruly, isn't it? Oh, look how it feels. I mean, I've had somebody try to rub my bald head. Imagine that. I was on a course. I was doing my end-of-life course, end-of-life doula training course. And I can't even remember what it was now. They said, okay, talk to the person next to you and tell them something about yourself. Now, at that time, I was wearing hats everywhere I went. So I said, oh, I'm actually bald under here. You know, the woman actually went to take my hat off my head. At which point I turned around and said, oh, what a bump. And no, I didn't. Of course I didn't. But that would have been a trauma response that personally I think would have been quite appropriate. But obviously it would have been taken disproportionately and I would have been judged from there till eternity. But when it comes to our trauma responses, with every issue that we experience, there is an appropriate tool depending on the consciousness of the person. For example, if it's like a melanated on melanated situation, right? So if I've got a problem with my sister or my brother or somebody in my community, hypnotherapy is a good tool to use, but not on its own, all right? Now, just because I'm a hypnotherapist, don't think that I'm trying to put that above any other therapy. I'm not. There have been times when I've said, I'm not doing hypnotherapy anymore for my own reasons. And there have been times of, also, I'm a trained Reiki healer at master level. I won't do that again. I don't like it, you know. So just because I'm talking about hypnotherapy, I'm talking about it, number one, because I know about it. I've fallen in love and out of love with it. I know what it is, and I know how to use it for the highest good of my brothers and sisters. But, you know, it also depends so much more too on the consciousness of your therapist. The stuff that comes up is not to be suppressed. The stuff that comes up is coming up to be healed. The stuff that comes up is painful. The stuff that comes up reminds us of stuff that we'd rather not remember. The stuff that comes up reveals to us why we react and respond the way that we have. The stuff that comes up tells us about the decisions that we've made or are making, or the decisions that other people have made on our behalf that have led us to the situations that we find ourselves in today. Where a therapist might feel that it is necessary to put various issues into a neat box and file them away, they have to realize that within the diaspora, a completely different approach is needed, and that is why I call myself an alternative hypnotherapist, because I can't often use the tools that have been given to do the work that we need to have done. There are a lot of unvoiced rules and etiquettes within our ancestral line as well. They have been ingrained within our ancestral DNA, within our bloodline, within our programming, within our teaching, and we pass them down through the generations within the assumed culture and the learned behaviors that have been gained by living in an inauthentic frame that is not supportive of our journey. Our maladies are not just within the subconscious, they're coming from the infested body, the infested spirit, the infested DNA, the infested conscious mind, the thought body, the thinking body, and the programming. And when I use the word infested, it is no mistake, it's not a nice word. But come on, brothers and sisters, we're talking about a trauma that is riddling our bodies. It's been packed in layers upon layers upon layers. It infests our organs. It infests our blood. It infests our being, our personality, our sense of identity. This is an infestation that can be healed, but we have to be aware of it, and we have to be having these conversations. So I know that this is deep. I know that this is a lot, and I know that you maybe would rather be listening to music right about now. The beauty I have is not knowing what you're thinking. And I don't even presume to guess what you're thinking, okay? Whatever you're thinking is up to you. But from the time that you're still listening, I do have your attention, and that does mean that I may not even be speaking to your consciousness, but maybe your subconscious. Maybe there are elements of you, personas within you, attitudes within you that are taking this in and are listening and digesting what's being said. You cannot heal what you cannot speak. I'll say that again. You cannot heal what you cannot speak. If you can't speak of it, then you can't heal it. If you can't articulate it, then you can't heal it, because you need to grab onto it. And you cannot speak about something that you have not understood. You cannot speak about something that you have not understood. I'd like to change that to overstood, or even stand. When you stand, you have an awareness. You're like, okay, I get it. Yeah, that's standing. When you understand, you stand under the authority of somebody else. You stand under somebody else's authority. I understand. When I stand, I get it. I get it. Okay, cool, I get it. When I overstand, I really get it. I get it. I overstand. I know it. I believe it. I feel it. This is truth. I get it. Yeah? And then there's inner standing, when you actually sink it into your DNA. There's also cosmic and other types of standing that we can have. But in the world today, we are taught to understand. It's deep what I'm saying. You cannot heal what you cannot speak. And you cannot speak what you have not understood. And so, an initial explanation of the trauma cycle process is vital, and it leads to much needed revelations and examinations that are needed first before the therapy begins. Okay? Once this unpicking has been seen and done, hypnotherapy and all the rest of them become superpowers. They are heightened, they are elevated in their ability to actually root out the problem. The problem, though, that we face was brought out in my previous show, that approximately 93% of melanated people are void of identity. We are not conscious. We are void of identity. Our identity has been stolen. We do not have a history. We have been shape-shifting from identity to identity based on whoever is controlling us. So how can you heal what you cannot speak? And how can you overstand what you cannot speak? This takes time. It takes time. But rather than looking outside of ourselves with blame or an expectation for healing to come from our oppressors, it would always and on every occasion be more empowering to look within at our personal use of flight, fight, and freeze trauma responses, and identify the wheel that we are on and where it is rooted and how it is reinforced. This allows us to see that we are in a traumatized state and in a constant state of survival. It's a setting, just like, when you go on your phone and you change your settings so that they are more in alignment with how you want the phone to work for you. We are similarly programmed. We are similarly set. When I'm working with people in hypnotherapy, I often take them to their control room, which is where all your settings are. You can turn things up, turn things down, move them to the left, move them to the right, slide this way, move that there, push that button, anything. Get the WD-40 and loosen that handle so that you can push it up. I love it. I love it. By looking within at the various cycles that operate, often without our awareness, we can accept the explanations for our own behaviors. Yes, when we start to look within, when we start to look at ourselves, when we start to look at why we have responded in the way that we have responded, or why we have behaved or acted in certain ways, we can only root them out when we find out where they started and where they reside within our bodies. Now, the body and mind, I'm coming off track now. The body and mind, they are linked. We are inside these bodies. And again, I know I say it a lot. This is my spaceship. This is my spaceship. And I know I'm not even using it to its fullest capacity. Actually, I'm probably quite abusive of this spaceship that I am actually very fortunate to be in. Do you know how many beings there are in the universe, in the cosmos, that actually want to be in a human body so that they can experience time and emotions? We are so fortunate. Aren't we fortunate? But yeah, I went off track and I've lost completely what I was saying. There is so much more to us. There is so much more to these machines that we sit in, and we minimize them when we sit in a car. We minimize them when we're sitting in front of the television. We minimize them when we're listening to somebody who assumes authority over us, because we are led away from ourselves. Often our trauma reactions are processed in shame, in being victimized, in being accused, in being ruled, in being ridiculed through disparaging comments and harsh criticisms and re-traumatizing situations. When the instinct, which is the automatic response, which may be to fight, to flight, to freeze, or to appease, manifests, when that manifests, then we automatically do what comes next. It's often not until much later that we sit down and we think, boy, shouldn't have punched her in her face, you know. She had it coming, but boy, you know. Or I shouldn't have cussed him off and told him about his mum. Shouldn't have done that. Maybe that was a bit wrong. Maybe I went a little bit too far. Yeah? But these responses often come as a result of our confusion and our shock. Okay? And these responses are rooted into the crevices and the dark places of our inner being that we often don't dare to look. But they have an effect on our organs, and they have an effect on our blood, and they have an effect on our overall well-being. And I know I've said it a lot in the past, when pain and suffering comes up, we then trot off to the doctors to get medicated, to get a chemical, to suppress it. That's not often in our best interests. Okay? Wherever it is that we have been suppressing or hiding our trauma is within ourselves, and it only further impacts the void of identity that is within us 100%. So you may ask, how did that void of identity come about? Well, there are many ways, and I'll be discussing them as I move on, as I receive more information with my spiritual partners that I work with. But for now, going back to the melanated woman, right? When you move from fighting, which is the typical melanated diasporan woman response, because she has had to survive, because she has been abandoned by her fathers, she has fought not just for herself but for her children, and then she has developed an aptitude to fight for herself once the children are grown. But if she has been shamed whilst fighting for her children, if she has been shamed for fighting for her children or those that she loves. She switches into the freeze or appease mode. Because it's like this. It's like, well, every time I do that, I'm going to get blasted for it. What am I supposed to do next? We don't have a fallback. So the fallback would naturally be to freeze because I don't know what to do next. Or appease and say, just, okay, fine, yeah, I'm wrong, or do whatever, you know. At that point, those children or loved ones are abandoned because she is disassociated, frozen. Whilst she is physically present, everybody else is abandoned spiritually, emotionally, informatively by her, and she is unaware because she is merely trying to survive. So you could say then that she has now become a robotic worker, determined to work and provide. She begins to develop the masculine energy to excess because the only power she has is in building, as in providing the material things for her children, which alleviates her guilt. They have a roof over their heads, they have food in their stomachs, they're going to school, they're clean, they've got on clothes, I'm washing for them, I'm cooking for them. The basics are met. But if she herself can't even reach her own spiritual needs, how can she meet those of somebody else? Or her emotional needs, or her psychological needs? If they're not met, how can she meet those of others adequately, appropriately, skillfully? You know, we can't do everything. At times, something has to give. And when we perceive ourselves as having failed, we further chastise ourselves. I think it's a good idea then to look at some symptoms of trauma. They include anxiety and depression, learning difficulties such as ADD, dyslexia, ADHD, memory loss, pain, disease and illness, relationship issues, i.e. divorce and estrangements, substance abuse and addiction, weight and digestion issues. Okay? Now I want you to think about that, all right? Anxiety and depression, learning difficulties, memory loss. I'm going to put in there brain fog as well. Pain, disease and illness, relationship issues, substance abuse and addiction, weight and digestion issues. Think of the melanated women in your life. You may look at yourself. Can you identify with any of those symptoms? Can you see them played out? Can you see your sister or yourself or your mother, daughter, best friend, lover in a state of anxiety and depression, experiencing learning difficulties? So many of us are now realizing at the ages of 30, 40, 50 and upwards, oh my gosh, I had a learning difficulty all that time and yet I struggled and survived. Memory loss. How many of us are experiencing memory loss? I think that for me is brain fog, when I lose words and I'm just feeling like I'm deteriorating. Pain, disease, illness, relationship issues. Of course you're going to have them. If you perceive yourself to be struggling to survive and all who are with you are not putting in the same effort, of course you're going to perceive yourself as carrying the weight. It's going to put a strain on your relationships, as is substance abuse and addiction. And then the big one, weight and digestion issues. Think of the melanated women in your life. You may look at yourself. Can you identify with any one of those symptoms? And have you ever questioned whether they might actually be trauma related? I hadn't really thought to myself, these could be the results of trauma. I hadn't thought about it. Like common sense says, of course they are trauma responses, and of course the body is going to do what the body's going to do, and of course we are programmed to react in certain ways. Yes, absolutely. But even as I've done my research, it's been like, GD it. It's been like, wow, this S goes deep. It goes so deep, and we don't talk about it. That's why I'm talking about it. I would rather be playing Lady Saw back in the day, not Marion Hall. I'd rather be playing music or Slackness or Bashment or whatever. I'd rather. But we need to be talking about these things. And when we're talking about our music, it feeds into all of this, because it's often our music that keeps us going. It's our music that keeps us moving forward. It's our music that makes us say, you know what? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so we go, with a spring in our step. But the real, true, authentic us ourselves, who are we? Where are we? Even if you don't perceive yourself as having experienced traumatizing events in this lifetime, please be aware that it is handed down through the generations, that are part of the plight of the melanated, and it is manifesting in such symptoms that do need to be addressed and healed. Now, I had the privilege of hearing a lady who has been given the, let's say, she was told that she had 3 weeks to live prior to 2020. Yeah? So prior to 2020, she was told that she had about 3 weeks or so to live, because she mistook symptoms that she was having for being menopausal symptoms or hormonal symptoms. It turned out that actually she was experiencing cancer symptoms, and she was told at that time that she had 3 weeks. 3 weeks, if she was lucky, to live. 2024, my girl is still going strong. We may blame our irritability on the behaviours of others. We may blame our imbalances on hormonal differences. We may be blaming, as I've said, other people who too are traumatised and void of identity. Or we may be blaming those who seek to control us and manipulate us into situations within which we can never fare well. But the time has come for us to look within at our reactions to situations so that we can get hold of our own personal trauma cycle that is running within our subconscious mind. Full stop. But let's take a look at anger for a moment. Please, just bear with me. Personally, I have a temper. I've got a bad temper. I've got a stink temper. And knowing the strength of my temper, I tend to retreat. I tend to appease. And I do that to allow for my own peace of mind. Now, I thought that was perhaps the healthiest thing to do. But I didn't realise that it was a trauma response. I'll give you an example. I once suffered really bad back pain. It was quite crippling. But instead of clutching my back, I was stooped forward and kind of holding myself where my appendix would be. The doctors saw that, and despite me saying, "It's my back," they decided to operate on my front and then told me that I was making it up and wasting their time. Yeah. That led to me getting sepsis and a whole load of terrible, terrible experiences as a result of that. But what I'm saying is that sometimes, at that time, the problem was with my back, but the only way that I could hold myself up was to stoop forward. Yeah? So my initial responses when I was younger was to resort to violence, physical violence. My natural inclination when I was younger was to lash out, was to be physically violent, because I didn't have the words to articulate until I was given the tools that I needed to help me articulate myself. Those tools were a pen and paper. I was told, write it down, write it out. Okay? As a result, I kind of went from being anger to appease. Sorry about that. I went from anger to appease. I went from anger to retreat. There wasn't any balance, you know. It probably would have been better if I had been able to balance my anger with my appeasing and balance my fight with my fright. My fright would have me lashing out. Fight. I hope you're understanding or overstanding or even standing what I'm saying. And I hope that it's allowing you the space that you need to figure out what your responses are. There is a wheel of anger, and it shows emotions that are related to trauma, like surprise and fear. Surprise, confusion, they contribute to anger. They contribute to fear. They contribute to trauma. Okay? Recently, I was talking to somebody and he was explaining to me about overeating and seeking carbohydrate foods. That's linked to trauma, you know. Overeating and seeking carbs is linked to trauma. In seeking out bread or cake, we are yearning for delight, which would make sense because you're looking to raise your psyche, you're looking to raise your spirit, you're looking to raise your happiness levels. It's invisible within our collective. We all have different vices, but in reality, oftentimes they are silent killers. It's like we are silently killing ourselves just so that we can feel delight, just so that we can feel comfort, contentment for a while, just so that we can make it through. Do you stand what I'm saying? These are all methods that we use to survive, so that we can keep going, so that we can feel safe. Now, to come out fighting is necessary at times. It's necessary. To be able to fight is necessary. It's something that we all need to do. It's not a bad thing. Yeah? We all have this ability. It's been given to us. It's been given to us. So it's not to be rebuked. It's to be balanced. It's to be used in the right way. In truth, I have to ask then if there can be any right or balanced way when the world we are flexing in is like a seesaw and the goalposts are constantly in flux. How can anybody keep their mind under such situations? Well, if you're interested in knowing yourself that bit better, I will always suggest that you buy yourself an exercise book, a journal, a notebook that you can use to examine yourself and your behaviours. I would also encourage you to write in the third person, because there are many personalities within you that are vying for attention. Okay, let me just explain that, okay? Say you want that cake. There's always going to be a voice that says, nah, you don't need the cake. You shouldn't have the cake. A moment on the lips is a lifetime on the hips. And then there's another voice that says, go on, eat the cake. You deserve it. You've had a long day. You've done a lot. Yeah? Two different personalities within you that are vying for attention. Through journaling, you can work out who is who, and you can work with them to balance their needs, their worries, their frustrations, their fears, and their expectations. As I said in the last show, it takes 100 people doing the work of following the guidance from within to create the ripples out through the collective. Each 100 people energetically frees 100,000 people. By following the guidance from within, freedom comes. This means trusting and following the personal guidance that is provided to you in your spaceship, in your craft, in your machinery. The answers are within you and often given to you through your highest teams and guides, your loving, wise and well ancestors. Be discerning, consult your heart, and know that it will not steer you wrong. When you are talking to your ancestors, be aware that many of them walked the earth and have their own vices that may sway their answers or your actions. But don't stop consulting, okay? 15 minutes a day of looking within is 1 hour over 4 days. It doesn't have to be strenuous. Just keep going. Okay? I know that this isn't an easy subject. I know that. And I know that it takes time. Nobody's expecting you to become the genius overnight. But you can start to master your body. Not listening to what the collective says that you should do with your body, but listening to your body and hearing what it wants you to do. Okay, on that note, I want to say thank you for listening to me today. It has been a pleasure to have your attention. Again, I have not sought to take your listening ears for granted, and I really hope that you've taken in what I have said with the intention of just making a small change, of just recognizing that there is a you inside you that is ready to guide you and help you navigate this world that was not created for you, but off your back and the backs of your ancestors. And as a result of that, you carry their shame, their guilt, their trauma, their worries, and their fears and anxieties. You carry their vices. Oftentimes, if you want a spliff, it might not even be you that actually wants it. If you want a drink, it might not actually be you that actually wants it. But by taking it in, you satisfy that entity, that ancestor, that being that was craving for it. Why? Because they were stressed out. Come on, brothers and sisters. There's no such thing as time in spirit. Time does not exist. So they are still in their states of trauma. They never got the opportunity to say, boy, that was hard. Let's sit down and have a group session about it. It never worked like that for them. So we have to sit down and have that group discussion within ourselves. We literally have to bring them to the table. Journal. Write it down. Let them all speak. Let them all have their word. And see where you are. Figure out who you are. Because yes, you're in this body. You're navigating this life. But there is so much more to you. Unheard voices that need to be heard. That need to be spoken to gently and lovingly. with care and consideration, so that we do not re-traumatize ourselves, nor our brothers and sisters and children. Okay? When it comes to those around you, ask them questions. Just start asking them questions. And you know what? If they don't want to answer the questions, it's because they're traumatized and they don't want to have to go there and think about the answers. But ask the question anyway, because then there's a chance that they're going to go off and quietly think about the situations they're in and the reasons why they came to be where they are. And because you asked the question, they may well come back to you and tell you the answer in their own sweet time. I'm DJ LP on Passion Radio, and if nobody else tells you this, just know that you heard it here first. You are perfect. You are an exceptionally important part of the tapestry, and without you, we are lacking. Okay? You're here on earth at this time to do something incredible, not to be led by people who don't know you or care about you. You are a gift to humanity. You are necessary. We need you. We love you. Even if we don't display it, even if we don't tell you. And the reason why we don't display it easily, even though it's in our hearts, the reason why we don't tell you is because we too are carrying trauma. But if you do your bit, we will do our bit, and we will all meet, and our children and our descendants will rise. But it starts here with us today. Okay, download the Passion Radio app. Download it, man. Download it, and then we can have conversations in the chat, yeah? I'm done until 8 o'clock tonight, when I will be playing reggae. No chat, just reggae, okay? All right. Niceness, beautiful music, uplifting music, maybe music from back in the day. Do I know what I'm going to play? Not yet, but I'm going to figure it out. I love you. One love, my darling brother and sister. Let's do this together.